Unexpected Elements is the podcast exploring the science behind the headlines.
It's a real melting pot.
Yeah, there certainly is a lot happening.
Unexpected Elements from the BBC World Service. Find it wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Should we take off our shoes? I'm visiting a woman named Malak, a Syrian mother of 3 sons. 2 of them are missing in Syria. I've just arrived at her tiny apartment in the suburbs of Istanbul. The windows open and we can hear children playing in the street outside. She scrolls through her phone showing me photos of the 2 brothers who she hasn't seen since they were arrested by the Syrian authorities 11 years ago. This is her elder son before he was arrested. He's just very young and with brown hair and a little mustache. This is the younger son, Maher, just before his arrest, and he's too young to face all of this. He's too young. In this tiny little living room, wherever you look, there are portraits of the 2 sons together. Welcome to the documentary from the BBC World Service. I'm Lina Sinjab, and on assignment, I've come to Turkey, home to over 3 million Syrian refugees who fled their war-torn country, to find out how thousands of them are still relentlessly looking for their missing loved ones who disappeared in Syria. Malak continues telling me about her missing sons.
My son was serving in the army at the time, and at the beginning of the revolution they were forcing army members to shoot at protesters, at unarmed peaceful protesters, and my son refused. So he was arrested by the military and he was put in the military prison, and he managed to get out and he was hiding in a farm with his friends and colleagues. But somebody, an informant, told the government where he was. So they raided the farm and took him, and we haven't heard anything at all about him since then. He was 19 years old. Soon after that, they went into my other son's school. He was 15 and they took him from the school simply because his brother had defected.
But how did all this start? The origins of the war in Syria go back 12 years. It all began as a peaceful uprising in 2011, with many Syrian people calling for change. But President Assad's brutal regime cracked down on unarmed protesters, killing and detaining thousands of them, and soon it turned into a fully fledged civil war. According to the United Nations, more than 5 million Syrians fled the country, seeking refuge in neighboring countries. Nearly 7 million have been displaced within Syria, their homes destroyed by bombing. In most cases, this was carried out by government-backed forces, but it's not that simple. The opposition were also divided, with many different armed factions. Still, the vast majority of killing and destruction was caused by government forces who had the army, the warplanes, the missiles, and the backing from powers like Russia and Iran. Today, the country is still in a desperate state. The bombing has almost stopped, but there is an economic crisis with nearly 90% of the population living below the poverty line. This is a story that I've followed for years. I myself am Syrian and had to leave my home country for my safety 10 years ago. I'd been arrested several times and interrogated, but they let me go, probably because I was a BBC journalist. Malak was arrested because she was a nurse helping civilians wounded in government attacks. She and her youngest son left Syria in 2017 and started a new life here in Turkey. But it has been years since she's heard anything about her missing sons, taken in 2012. Early on, there was the occasional tantalizing bit of news.
The only time I heard anything about Maher, my younger son, was in 2014. A friend of mine was in a prison and she came out and said that her husband was probably in the same cell as he'd been in, and she explained why. She said she saw the name Maher written on the wall. It was written out in full, and under it were the initials MS because he used to be in love with the neighbor's daughter, and her name was Sarah. So he put his name and his initials MS, Maher and Sarah. And after that, a couple of others were in the same prison, Kifasusa, and they said they'd seen him personally in Kifasusa. That was 2014, and I haven't heard anything since then.
Like so many families in the same situation, Malak has paid to try to find out more about her missing sons. These payments are made to middlemen.
It's like a drowning man grasping at straws. They exploit the feelings of a mother looking for her child. And most of the time, they trap you. They take one word from you and they build on it and create a story. So they make you more interested and you want to pay more so that you get information. But in most cases, they are just lying and extracting your money for nothing.
Syrians are parting with huge amounts of money in their search for their missing loved ones. There is an assumption, because that's the way things have always worked in Syria, that paying bribes is the only way to get anything done, even to find out information about people who've disappeared or to get them released. To find out more, I traveled across Turkey. I flew to the Turkish city of Gaziantep. It's one of the closest to the Syrian-Turkish border. And I'm walking in one of the alleyways of its old bazaar. Everything here is a strong reminder of the bazaar in the city of Aleppo in Syria. Here in the copper market, you can hear the sound of the hammering of craftsmen working on the copper. I can smell the soaps, so much similar to the soaps of Aleppo, and I can smell the spices everywhere. And this is a city that is home for nearly 500,000 Syrian refugees.
My name is Riyad Ablar, co-founder in the Association of Detainees and Missing in Saidnaya prison.
Saidnaya prison is one of the most notorious in Syria, and Riyad, who's actually Turkish, was detained there. He is thin with a beard, and in spite of his experiences, he smiles and even laughs during our conversation on his office roof terrace in the suburbs of Gaziantep. He was arrested in 1996 when he was a 19-year-old student studying in Syria after criticizing the government in a letter to a friend. Further trumped-up charges followed. Like so many, he completely disappeared, and his family heard nothing from him for 15 years. When he was eventually released after a total of 21 years, he and a fellow former prisoner in Saidnaya decided to set up this organization to help Syrian families whose relatives had been imprisoned and had disappeared.
We began to interview the ex-detainees, especially in Saidnaya prison. We asked them, who was with you?
They said to former prisoners, don't tell us what you heard from other people, but
who you saw in front of your eyes.
They collected this information into a database and then cross-referenced with lists of missing Syrians given to them by their relatives.
We began to compare the names, and we shown that there is many names coming, and we began to give news to the families about their sons and what happened to them.
The United Nations estimates the number of missing Syrians to be 100,000. NGOs like Riyadh's believe the figure to be even higher. He says in the majority of cases, the government is to blame. But there are cases where opposition armed factions are responsible for the disappearance. Riyadh is extremely concerned about the amount of money families who come to him have paid to try to get information.
Most of them told us $5,000, $2,000, $10,000. Even I saw a family, they sold their houses to pay the middleman.
Sometimes the amounts are even bigger. Riyadh's NGO has conducted a detailed study of how much has been paid out by families in US dollars. calculating the average sized payment and multiplying it by the UN figure of 100,000 missing people.
From 2011 to 2020, it was more than $900 million.
So within 9 years, 900 million, that's almost 100 million a year.
Yes.
That
yes.
was paid to get information about the missing one.
Yes.
In most cases, people don't get genuine information. So Riyadh and his team hold workshops to help families spot when they are being duped. I can see here a scan of some official documents. Let me just read. This one is from the Air Force Security Investigation Branch. Can you tell me what is this about?
No, it is, of course, unreal paper.
How do you know that it's unreal? There are the stamps, there's the logo.
Firstly, it is logo.
The logo is false.
And not just false. There is no intelligence branch in Syria have a logo.
That's very true, yes.
Yes, they don't use the logo at all.
Riyadh went on to explain how he knows these are false. He says that genuine documents from the security services don't contain signatures or logos, but they do have a reference number and a date. And these fake papers do have signatures and logos.
Assalamu alaikum.
When I was with Riyadh, one of his colleagues, Fatima, contacted a man who they are trying to help find information about his missing brother. Qadri Ahmed Bedli lives in Idlib in Syria. He agreed to speak to us on the phone. Thank you, Mr. Qadri, and thank you for talking to us today and sharing your story. What's the story of your brother? What happened to him? So in 2013, he was arrested by, some thugs working for the regime. And what happened after that? Wow. So basically, since 2013, they've paid lots of money. Recently, somebody came out from prison. He posted on Facebook that I was in Saidnaya prison. And we thought, let's check out. And we called him, and he gave us so many details about our brother that nobody knew except us, even the tattoos that he had on his body. And he told us that there is this lawyer who can help you. And he connected us to the lawyer, and the lawyer told us, I went in and I saw your brother, and he has no case against him. We can get him out for you. It's going to cost $1,100. You pay me now $700, and then later you can pay me the rest after he's out. And we were so thrilled. We had hope. We paid the $700, and the lawyer blocked us after that. We can't reach him, and we got nothing. After this, you've got no other way to find out if he's still alive or not, if it is true that he was there or not. Just 10 days after we've been fooled by the lawyer, we received the death certificate. A death certificate of our brother was issued, and it turned out that he died in 2014 in Saidnaya prison, and he died because of torture. So we were just fooled by the information that we got and the payment that we made, basically. Fatima says that death certificates can be fake. This may not be the end for this family, as was the case with another Syrian refugee, Muhammad Abdussalam, who I met in Istanbul.
المشفى العسكري هذا بالشام وهي رابور الطبي توقف قلب فجائي.
He's showing me the documents that they gave his family, a death certificate and a medical report saying the reason for his death is heart attack. Muhammad, who is in his late 30s, is very much alive, although clearly traumatized by the torture he experienced in prison in Syria. He was stopped at a checkpoint because he says he was involved in peaceful protests in Idlib against the government and corruption. Any form of perceived dissent in Syria can lead to arrest and imprisonment.
I
don't know why I was detained. We went out to ask for our rights. We asked for reforms. Maybe it was because of some informers. I don't know the reason why I was detained.
The Syrian regime mainly targets young men from the Muslim Sunni community for detention, but there are also older men, as well as some women and children who've disappeared behind prison bars. Many of them may have nothing to do with the opposition or the uprising. They could be living in a town that protested against President Assad or were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time.
برجع بقول لك كان التحقيق
The interrogation was of the most ferocious and cruel kind that I have ever seen or heard of.
The minute I asked him about what he witnessed in the prison, he got so distressed, short of breath. He held his body together as if remembering what he's been through. He left the room, got outside to get some fresh air. But in spite of this, he made it clear he wanted to carry on and for his story to be heard.
عذبنا بأشرس وأصعب أنواع العذاب حتى الجنس.
I got tortured in the most cruel and brutal way. We even experienced sexual torture. We were taken to places I did not imagine we had in Syria. We grew up hearing that Syria was about resistance. I found out it was about various places of torture. It has the most brutal and dangerous prisons on this earth.
He continues with more details which are too awful to describe here. Some people don't survive the torture. While Muhammad was in Saydnaya prison, he was given up for dead.
Once I fainted, so they took me to the salt room. I remained there because they thought I had died. The room is full of bodies covered in salt. So when I woke up, I looked right and left and started touching the dead bodies. All the corpses were covered with salt so they would not stink. They would only remove the bodies once a month.
As we heard, his family were given a death certificate in 2014, but his father refused to believe it.
دفع والدي الله يرحمه مبلغ من المال.
My father, God bless his soul, paid huge sums of money, more than $40,000 or $50,000, to try and get me out. After he paid huge sums, he got in touch with a broker. I was released with the help of this guy.
For Muhammad's family, paying did actually work. So is Riyadh's NGO right to deter people from doing this? Yes, he says, because if you take 100 families, at least 90 will be disappointed by the middlemen offering information and failing to deliver. And of course, they have to show some evidence of success, however slight, for this to continue to work.
Because when somebody released, he will come and said, my family paid. And when other families heard it, wow.
Then everyone wants to do the same.
Yes.
Who are these middlemen, in most cases? Who are they?
Most of them is from the intelligence itself. And the others, maybe they are working together.
So they are either representative of the security apparatus themselves or somebody with connection to them and sharing the money together.
Yes, of course. Let me say, they're working as a web.
It's like a network together.
Yes, of course.
The security and intelligence services in Syria are the most feared of all government departments. They are like a secret police force who will detain and torture people who they believe might not be loyal to President Assad. There are several branches, and each has its own prison. Do you have evidence that this money went to the regime or where this money went to?
The salaries in Syria are very low. And the security person, intelligence security person, even their salary is low in the regions. And every working in the regions of the governmental work, their salary is low. And regime let them take money to stay loyal to service the regime.
Corruption in Syria has long been an issue. I know from when I lived there that bribes had to be paid for almost everything. To find out more, I visit a lawyer who recently fled Syria to Lebanon, where I now live. We've just arrived in the middle of the mountain. It's really like a beautiful little town full of green trees overlooking the valley, and just arrived to meet him. Marhaba, marhaba. He's waiting to get asylum in Europe, and he doesn't want us to use his name or his voice, but he's happy to describe how corruption and bribery are embedded in Syria's court system, where he used to defend people who'd been arrested for allegedly opposing the regime. Most would be taken to the so-called terrorism court.
In reality, this court is a branch of the security apparatus in the form of a court. It can prosecute someone even for liking something on social media. Anyone who thinks of opposing the regime could be transferred to this court. It is appointed by the highest security departments in Syria.
And bribery runs through this court, which sends many defendants to the notorious Saidnaya prison, experienced by some of our interviewees.
Corruption and bribery can happen at any given stage, since it is embodied in the backbone of the Syrian regime. So any part of this regime can be bribed. You can bribe the security services in the court or after the court, but the best is to sort this out at the security branch detention center. They usually ask for a sum to keep the detainee for a period of time, then refer him. This is not to release the detainee immediately, but to speed up the operation, as they have to look into the detainee's case. And sometimes there are higher officers who want a share of the pay.
What he's telling me is that his clients had to pay bribes if they wanted any chance of avoiding prison. But it clearly didn't always work.
This court has been named the Court of the Millions because of the millions paid on a daily basis in this court. Payments start the minute you step through the main gate of the court.
This lawyer also helps the families of the missing, including a mother from Damascus who I meet in Beirut, where she's visiting her sister. She wants to remain anonymous, so we are not using her voice.
Thank you for talking to me today. Tell me a little bit about your story.
What can I tell you about my story? My story is the story of the Syrian people. I'm a woman whose husband, son, and brother were detained in August 2012, and they disappeared. Since then, we have been looking for them without any answers. The regime is determined to keep them disappeared and not reveal any information about them.
Were they involved in any political movement?
No, they didn't have anything to do with politics, but it is possible they were involved in some humanitarian work, helping people who were displaced. It is possible.
Do you recall what happened that day? How did they come to take them?
We were sitting peacefully at home, and there is a harsh knock at the door. They enter the house in a horrible way. It's a raid. Then they entered our house and started smashing things while pointing their machine guns at us. When I looked at my husband, there was no color in his face and no expression. He was truly terrified.
They took her son, her husband, and her brother. They also stole computers, mobile phones, money, and their cars. She's been searching ever since, at first through high-level contacts. They also paid for information, but got nothing.
Now we just ask the military police, who get lists of names of dead people. Some are announced and others are not. Their names are not among the list of the dead. All this is done by the lawyers we have hired.
Do you still have hope that they will come back?
Of course, it's hope that sustains me. Without hope, I can't live.
Hope is the characteristic displayed by so many families with relatives who've disappeared, according to Leila Kiki. She's executive director of the Syria Campaign, a human rights organization based in Berlin which supports peaceful opposition. She speaks to me on a video call.
If they don't see a body that they can bury in dignity, then they will continue to hope. We don't have exact numbers of people who are alive, but the historic precedent of this regime is that there are people who have survived in Assad dungeons after decades of being missing and disappeared. We have seen more recently, last year, some footage of mass graves. A rights organization have documented locations of mass graves. That said, it is believed that the majority of those who have been disappeared are still alive and can be saved.
And do you think enough has been done so far to try and find them?
There have been years of silence and inaction by the international community and the United Nations around the issue of the missing in Syria. More recently, the UN General Assembly has mandated the creation of a new independent institution to tackle this issue of the missing.
Is it going to have enough power to get answers and get the regime to cooperate?
The humanitarian mandate of the institution gives me hope, and I believe that countries with influence in Syria and the United Nations should exert pressure on the regime to cooperate.
But after more than a decade, the war in Syria has slipped from the headlines, and some Arab countries are reaching out to President Assad.
There have been escalating recent moves by Arab states toward normalizing ties with the Syrian regime and rehabilitating Assad's diplomatic image. However, this makes it even more important to put a spotlight on the mass enforced disappearance and crimes against humanity that this regime have been and continues to commit every day.
We contacted the Syrian government to get its response to these accusations and to ask whether it will cooperate with the new institution for the missing in Syria. We have had no reply. Back in Istanbul, I asked Malak, whose 2 sons are missing and who we heard from at the beginning of the program, what expectations she has from the new UN-backed institution.
I really hope we will get something out of this. We just need to know the fate of those who have disappeared. Dead or alive, we just need to know.
Assignment was presented by me, Lina Sinjab, and produced by Caroline Bailey. The editor was Penny Murphy, and the program was mixed by Rod Farquhar.